P.D.Scott is an eminent scholar of deep politics. In fact, he's the man who gave us the whole concept of deep politics that we need to use to read history the way it really is. He's the author of the recent book, The Road to 9/11.
Thank you very much. You know, I've been in public speaking for 60 years, and what I'm about to say this afternoon may be about the most important topic, the most serious topic, and the most alarming topic that I have ever talked about in those whole 60 years. I want to talk in the same vein as Webster Tarpley on Friday about the grave threat to world peace that we face in the possibility of a U.S. attack, possibly a nuclear attack on Iran, and how important understanding the truth about 9/11 is as perhaps our best available means of forestalling that terrible possibility. Now, I'm the third person, I think, to remind you of what Brzezinski warned Congress about last February, that an attack on Iran would lead to a spreading and deepening quagmire, and that it would very probably be preceded by, and these are his words, a terrorist act in the United States blamed on Iran. It almost sounds as if we should invite him to our conference. He doesn't say an incident by Iran, he said an incident blamed on Iran, and that, of course, is what frightens all of us here so much. Now, there's been talk about this possible attack on Iran for at least 2 or 3 years now, and Seymour Hersh in particular has been predicting it regularly every 2 or 3 months. And that might make you think that, well, if he keeps predicting it, well, then it isn't really so serious after all. A number of people predicted it for March of this year, then it was predicted for April the 16th, and then it was predicted for May the 17th. Does that mean we shouldn't be alarmed then because we just keep getting these warnings? Well, I had lunch with Dan Ellsberg about 10 days ago, and I was at the time fairly optimistic and said so. And then on Saturday, June the 16th, there was a newspaper story in the New York Times which revealed that the New York Times is worried about this. Now, that's a sedate newspaper, and they don't raise their voice extremely. But they said that there is a behind-the-scenes debate in the administration over between the Cheney position, those in Vice President Dick Cheney's office, who are pressing for greater consideration of military strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, and the faction of Condoleezza Rice, who for a year now has been trying to get the United States to join forces with Europe, Russia, and China to press Iran to suspend its uranium enrichment activities. Now, here are a couple of things that weren't in the New York Times story. Remember, we've had many stories about this from many different sources, and it's surprising the extent to which there is consensus about them. The plans are there, and they've alarmed a lot of people inside the Bush administration who are leaking in various directions. And one of the things that is being leaked is that these attacks, if they occur, will be massive, that there are more than 450 targets, many of them underground. And the second thing that is being leaked by many people is because they are underground, that there's a serious risk that the attacks will be nuclear. And I feel I'm dealing with insanity when I tell you these things, but there it is in the newspapers, and we have to deal with it. This is CNN. Among the options U.S. military officials have been asked to examine is the use of nuclear weapons against underground facilities for Iran's controversial nuclear program. Now, I want to agree strongly. I'm going to disagree a bit with Webster Tarpley later on, but I want to agree very strongly with him that this isn't just a threat that we will get into a long time struggle with an Islamist fundamentalism, which we have helped foment by our excesses, although that certainly would be one of the consequences. It also very much risks confrontation with the Soviet Union, who do not want a nuclear war going on their borders, and a confrontation with China. It's a good way to unite the world against the United States in a way that it is not yet united against the United States. I read a book once about geostrategy, and it was in the middle of the 1990s, and it said the geostrategic nightmare for America would be a course of action which united Iran, China, and Russia. Well, that's exactly the formula that this threat is leading towards. Now, the Times story about Rice and Cheney said nothing about Robert Gates, who's Rumsfeld's successor as the Secretary of Defense. But Gates has a reputation for wanting to realign defense policy with the non-military strategies advocated by Rice. And in fact, he has been replacing a lot of Rumsfeld's people inside the Pentagon, and I'm particularly happy that he got rid of Stephen Cambone, who was the head of the Defense Intelligence activities that were second-guessing the CIA estimates and saying, yes, we do have weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and leading us, therefore, into an unnecessary and disastrous war in Iraq. I'll read one sentence from a recent story that Gates has been leading, has played a largely quiet role in steering U.S. policy in a more realist direction, promoted as well by Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. That difference has made a growing number of hawks increasingly unhappy, including many neoconservatives who had grown disillusioned with Rumsfeld's refusal to increase the U.S. forces in Iraq. You hear that Rumsfeld was let go, not because he was too much of a hawk, but because he wasn't enough of a hawk. He opposed the surge. So Rumsfeld's replacement by Gates can be taken as a sign that the Bush administration is perhaps less likely than before to attack Iran. The in-house forces that led inexorably to war against Iraq have been weakened by the departure of people like Rumsfeld and Cambone. But paradoxically, the weakening of the in-house hawk contingent increases the chance that an attack on Iran will be preceded by a second 9/11, the most likely scenario for an attack that some people obviously very much want anyway. And here I'm going to quote from an article from a former CIA officer. It came out in 2005, but many people have repeated its gist since then. He has noted that the plans to attack Iran were drawn up, a quote, to be employed in response to another 9/11 type terrorist attack on the United States. And he went on and he said, just like Hirsch, that the plan includes a large-scale air assault on Iran employing both conventional and tactical nuclear weapons. And here's a sentence that's so important I'm going to read it twice. As in the case of Iraq, the response is not conditional on Iran actually being involved in the act of terrorism directed against the United States. Let's listen to that again. As in the case of Iraq, the response is not conditional on Iran actually being involved in the act of terrorism directed against the United States. This is what Brzezinski was saying when he said that it could be preceded by a terrorist act in the United States blamed on Iran. This is, I think, a real threat, and it makes what we are doing here extremely important. Well, what can we do about this? Our ally is the truth, and truth in the end, is powerful. But the power of truth is long-term power. It's not short-term power. You can't say, oh, I've discovered something, and run out in the street and expect the world to turn around and give you a Nobel Prize. History doesn't happen that way. We have to acknowledge that the powers of sanity, reason, and information are traditionally weak in trying to constrain forces in power that are intent on war.